You'd think after 7 years of marriage, two people would know each other inside out. At least, that's what I thought when I married Isabella. But the truth is, you can live under the same roof with someone, share meals, a bed, even dreams, and still feel like a stranger to them. That's what I became, a stranger in my own home. Our story started like most love stories, full of promise and excitement. I remember the way Isabella used to light up when she saw me walk into a room. Back then, she laughed at my jokes, even the terrible ones, and I couldn't wait to share every detail of my day with her. Those first years of marriage were a dream. Dinners together, weekend hikes in the mountains, and long nights talking about our future. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Somewhere along the way, things changed. I can't tell you exactly when it started. Maybe it was the demanding new art class that kept her late at the studio, or the new circle of acquaintances she seemed to prioritize over me. At first, I thought it was a phase, something that would pass once we adjusted. I tried harder, planned date nights, left little notes for her to find, even took up pottery, hoping for a shared interest she then quickly abandoned. But nothing worked. Isabella drifted further away, and I became background noise. Picture this. I'd walk into the living room after a long day at work, excited to see her, and she wouldn't even look up from her tablet. There I was, pouring every ounce of love I had into this marriage, and she couldn't even spare me a glance. She'd chuckle at something on her screen, and I'd wonder, when was the last time I'd made her laugh like that? You start to question yourself in moments like that. Was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? But deep down, I knew it wasn't about me. Isabella had made a choice, consciously or unconsciously, to live in a world where I didn't matter. I can't tell you how many nights I sat at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair across from me, waiting for her to come home. Sometimes she'd text me, saying she was held up at the studio. Most times, she didn't bother. And when she finally did walk through the door, her excuses were rehearsed, her tone indifferent. Class ran over, or I grabbed a bite with the art group. It didn't matter what I said or did. Isabella had checked out. One night, I decided to confront her, not angrily, just honestly. I told her how I felt, how lonely I'd been, how much I missed her. And you know what she said? "What do you want me to do about it, Ethan? I'm busy. You do you." Those words hit me harder than any argument we'd ever had. They weren't just dismissive. They were a dismissal of me as a person, as her husband. She couldn't even pretend to care. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last few years in my head. Every effort I'd made, every attempt to bridge the growing gap between us. It all felt meaningless. Isabella wasn't interested in fixing things because, in her mind, there was nothing to fix. That's when it hit me. I had spent years trying to save something that only I was fighting for. I was holding on to memories of who Isabella used to be, not who she had become. And who she had become didn't see me anymore. I wish I could tell you I slammed the door that night, that I stormed out in a dramatic blaze of glory. But I didn't. Instead, I lay there in silence, staring at the woman who was supposed to be my partner, my best friend, and realized she was neither. By morning, I had made my decision. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do or how I was going to do it, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pouring my heart into a marriage where I was invisible. They say hope is the last thing to die. That was true for me. Even after all the indifference, the cold stares, and the dismissive words, I still held on to the idea that Isabella and I could find our way back to each other. So, when things reached a breaking point, I suggested couples therapy. It wasn't an easy thing to bring up. Imagine sitting across from someone who barely acknowledges you and saying, "I think we need help." Her response? A shrug and a, "Sure, if it'll make you stop complaining." That should have been my first clue. Therapy was a chore for Isabella, a box to tick off, not an opportunity to rebuild what we'd lost. But I was desperate to feel like I mattered, desperate to believe there was still a version of us worth saving. We walked into Dr. Eleanor Vance's office on a crisp autumn evening. The room was calm, inviting even, with soft lighting and neutral colors. Dr. Vance greeted us with a kind smile, her demeanor serene and composed. "Let's start with something simple," she said, folding her hands neatly on the desk. "What do you both value most in a marriage?" I looked at Isabella, hoping she'd go first. Maybe she'd say something heartfelt, something that would remind me of the woman I fell in love with. Instead, she crossed her arms and said, "Comfort." Comfort, I repeated, confused. Yeah, she said, shrugging. Having someone to keep things running smoothly, pay the bills, make life easy. Comfort. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. I stared at her, trying to process her words. That's it. That's all you value. What else is there? She replied, her tone flat, like she was discussing a utility bill. Dr. Vance intervened, her voice gentle but firm. Isabella, can you elaborate on what comfort means to you? Isabella sighed, clearly annoyed. It's not complicated. I like having a predictable life. Ethan takes care of the tedious stuff, so I can focus on what's important to me. What's important to me? Asterisk I though. And where exactly do I fit into that? Dr. Vance turned to me, her empathetic eyes encouraging. Ethan, how does that make you feel? How did it make me feel? It made me feel like a caretaker, like I'd spent years giving every piece of myself to someone who saw me as little more than a convenience. But instead of unleashing all the anger and sadness that was building inside me, I took a deep breath and said, it makes me feel insane. I explained how hard I tried, how I'd been there for Isabella through every new artistic endeavor, every stressful gallery submission, every late night at her studio. I told her how much I missed her, how I longed for the connection we once had. And Isabella? She rolled her eyes. You're being overly dramatic, she said, waving a hand dismissively. I'm not the sentimental type, and you know that. Why are we even here? There's no major crisis. I looked at her, stunned. No major crisis? This woman had turned our marriage into a cold, functional arrangement, and she couldn't even see it. Dr. Vance tried to mediate. Isabella, do you understand why Ethan feels undervalued? Another shrug. I think he's just looking for problems. I'm fine with how things are. That was it for me. Fine with how things are? How could anyone be fine living like this? Isabella wasn't just indifferent. She was in complete denial about the state of our marriage. The session ended, and we walked out in silence. Isabella didn't even bother to ask how I felt, or if I wanted to talk about what had been said. She just pulled out her phone and started scrolling, like nothing had happened. As we drove home, I stared out the window, the street lights blurring into a stream of golden haze. I realized I'd been fighting for something that only existed in my mind. Isabella wasn't interested in saving our marriage. She didn't care about love or connection. Comfort was her priority, and as long as I kept the bills paid and the household running, she was content. By the time we pulled into the driveway, my mind was made up. Therapy had been my last hope, and it had confirmed what I'd been too afraid to admit. Isabella didn't see me, she didn't value me, and she never would. That night, I started planning my exit, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I couldn't keep living like this, existing in the shadow of someone who couldn't even be bothered to acknowledge my presence. It's funny how clarity can hit you in waves. At first, it's subtle, just a quiet voice in the back of your mind whispering, this isn't right. But then, one day, it's a roaring truth you can't ignore. That's what it felt like after that therapy session. As I sat across from Isabella, watching her scroll through her phone like nothing had changed, I realized something. I was done. But leaving wasn't going to be dramatic. I wasn't going to yell or slam doors. No. If Isabella valued comfort and predictability so much, then I was going to make sure she felt exactly what life was like without me quietly holding everything together. That night, while Isabella slept, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I opened our joint bank account, a fund I had spent years building. She never paid much attention to it. Money just magically appeared to keep her comfortable life running smoothly. I transferred the bulk of the funds into a private account under my name. Not everything, just enough. Enough to leave her a taste of the chaos she'd cultivated. It wasn't out of spite. It was about reclaiming what was mine. The next step was the utilities. You wouldn't believe how many things are under your name until you're the one canceling them. Electricity, water, internet. I handled all of it. Isabella never bothered with those details. She probably thought the lights turned on by themselves. I scheduled disconnections for the week after I planned to leave, ensuring there'd be no warning sign until I was long gone. As I worked, I thought about the irony of it all. Isabella always said she liked comfort, but she'd built her entire world on a foundation I had quietly maintained. Without me, her so-called comfort was a house of cards. The hardest part wasn't the logistics, it was the memories. As I packed my things, just the essentials, really, I came across pieces of our life together. The framed photo from our trip to the coast, the anniversary card she gave me 5 years ago, back when her words actually meant something. I hesitated, holding the card in my hands, but then I set it down and kept packing. Those memories belonged to a version of us that no longer existed. Then there was the affair. I hadn't planned to dig into her private life, but something inside me needed answers. Late one night, when Isabella was out with her art group, or Marcus, I should say, I found a second, hidden phone tucked away in her art supplies. The messages were all there, staring back at me like a punch to the gut. She hadn't even bothered to be particularly clever about hiding it. Ethan is so predictable, one message read. He just wants to talk and connect. I can't take it anymore. Marcus's response was even worse. Then why stay? You know I'm here for you. And her reply, because he pays the bills, and it's easy. But honestly, Ethan bores me to death. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. Part of me felt numb. Part of me felt vindicated. Her betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was calculated. She had reduced me to a paycheck, a convenience, and nothing more. But I didn't confront her. What would have been the point? She'd already made her choice, and now I was making mine. Instead, I photographed the messages, saved them to a secure folder, and put the phone back. They weren't for revenge, not yet anyway. They were for protection. The final piece of my plan was the house. Legally, it was in both our names, but I'd paid for most of it. I met with a lawyer to make sure my rights were protected. He advised me to act swiftly and document everything, which I did. Every bill, every transaction, every instance of neglect. I had it all in writing. When everything was ready, I wrote a note. It wasn't long, but it said everything I needed to say. Isabella, I've spent years giving you love, respect, and comfort. You've given me betrayal and indifference. I hope you enjoy the life you've built for yourself, because I'm done being a part of it. Goodbye. I left it on the kitchen counter, right where she'd see it. The night before I left, I walked through the house one last time. Each room held memories, some good, some painful. The living room, where we used to laugh together, now felt like a museum of lost time. The bedroom, once a place of intimacy, had become a cold, silent space. As I closed the door to the guest room, where I'd been sleeping for months, I felt an odd sense of relief. The next morning, I packed my bags and quietly walked out. No fights, no tears, just the sound of the door clicking shut behind me. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. You'd think someone would notice if their husband of 7 years disappeared. I wasn't hiding. I just left quietly, deliberately. I left behind the house, the bills, the note on the kitchen counter, all of it. And do you know what happened? Nothing. Days passed, and I waited for a text, a call, even an email, maybe some kind of acknowledgement. But from Isabella? Silence. It was as if I'd vanished into thin air, and she didn't even notice. At first, I thought she was pretending not to care. I imagined her reading the note and sitting with the reality of what she'd done. Maybe she needed time to process. But the truth? Isabella was so wrapped up in her own world that my absence didn't even register. She was too busy scrolling through social media, texting Marcus, and attending her art shows to realize her life was crumbling around her. The first cracks appeared about a week after I left. Isabella was at a high-end boutique, trying to pay for an expensive new dress, when her card got declined. Of course, she assumed it was a mistake. She probably even rolled her eyes at the cashier, muttering something about the bank being incompetent. But when she logged into our joint account and saw the balance, less than $100, her perfect little world started to wobble. I can imagine the confusion on her face, the slow realization that she'd taken everything I did for granted. Still, knowing Isabella, she probably thought it was a glitch, something she could fix with a quick call to customer service. But then came the bills. The electricity shut off first. I had timed it perfectly, right when she'd be settling in for one of her evening inspiration sessions. No lights, no Wi-Fi, no warning. She called the utility company in a panic, only to find out the account had been canceled. Not overdue, not suspended, canceled. The water followed, then the internet. Bit by bit, her comfort, the thing she claimed to value above all else, was stripped away. And the best part? She had no idea how to fix any of it. Isabella had spent years outsourcing the basics of life to me. She didn't know how to handle bills, schedule repairs, or even contact the right people to get services reinstated. While all this was happening, I was living my best life. I'd rented a cozy apartment across town, small, but peaceful. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of her constant dismissiveness. My days were mine again, free from the shadow of someone who couldn't be bothered to care. Meanwhile, Isabella's house of cards was collapsing. She started reaching out to her friends for help, but by then, I'd already sent them the evidence of her betrayal, screenshots of her messages with Marcus, the mocking comments about me, the audacious plans to keep me around for comfort while she pursued her affair. The fallout was swift. Her best friend, someone she'd confided in for years, stopped returning her calls. Her mother, who adored me, called to tell her how disappointed she was. Even her colleagues began to distance themselves. Isabella had always been the sophisticated artist, the one with the perfect life. Now, she was the woman who cheated on her husband and got caught. The cherry on top? Marcus ghosted her. I knew he would. Guys like him aren't in it for the long haul. The moment things got messy, he was out. Isabella probably called him a dozen times, leaving frantic voicemails about how much she needed him. But Marcus, he was smart enough to cut his losses and run. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy watching it all unfold from a distance. Not because I wanted revenge, well, maybe a little, but because it confirmed everything I already knew. Isabella didn't value me, our marriage, or even the comfort she claimed to cherish. She valued convenience, and without me, she had none. By the second week, I heard she'd started selling off her expensive art supplies and designer clothes to make ends meet. The life she had built, the one she thought was so secure, had crumbled faster than she could comprehend. And for the first time, she had no one to blame but herself. You'd think walking away from a 7-year marriage would leave a void, a sense of loss. And sure, for the first few days, it did. I'd sit in my new apartment, staring at the bare walls, wondering if I'd made the right choice. But that emptiness didn't last long. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the constant weight of Isabella's indifference, free from trying to be enough for someone who never appreciated me. It was like stepping out of a storm into clear, open skies. And in that clarity, I started rediscovering myself. The first thing I did was set up an easel and buy new paints. Painting had always been a passion of mine, something I'd loved long before Isabella and I got together. Back then, I'd spend hours capturing landscapes, city scenes, and abstract emotions on canvas. But somewhere along the way, I'd put the brushes down, too consumed by the demands of our marriage to pick them back up. That first painting I did after leaving, a vibrant abstract of a sunrise, I woke up early, sat up by the window, and just let the colors flow. The light streamed in, illuminating the canvas, and I felt a rush of joy I hadn't felt in years. That moment sparked something in me. I started spending my weekends exploring galleries, sketching in parks, and dedicating evenings to my art, capturing the beauty and emotion I'd suppressed for so long. With every brushstroke, I felt more alive, more myself. And then I met Sophia. It wasn't planned. I wasn't looking for anything, just enjoying an opening at a local gallery. Sophia was standing near one of my smaller pieces, her head tilted slightly as she studied the image. Something about her caught my attention, and before I could overthink it, I walked over and started a conversation. She wasn't like Isabella. Sophia was warm, curious, and unassuming. We talked about art, life, and shared experiences. There was no pretense, no walls, just an easy connection that felt natural and genuine. Over time, we started spending more time together, grabbing coffee after work, exploring the city, and even going on a few painting excursions to the countryside. Sophia didn't just support my passion. She shared it, being an avid photographer herself. She'd often set up her camera while I painted, offering insights and encouragement. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. It wasn't just about painting, though. Sophia cared about me, not the provider, not the convenience, but me. She listened, asked questions, and made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. At first, I was cautious. After Isabella, trusting someone felt like a risk. But Sophia never pressured me. She gave me the space to heal, to figure out who I was outside of the shadow of my marriage. While my personal life was blossoming, I also started working on a project that had been simmering in the back of my mind. A collection of essays about my journey. It wasn't about Isabella, not really. It was about me, about rediscovering my worth, reclaiming my happiness, and learning to let go of the past. Writing became a catharsis, a way to process everything I'd been through. Each word felt like a step forward, a way of putting distance between the man I was and the man I was becoming. The apartment, small as it was, became my sanctuary. The walls weren't bare anymore. They were covered with my paintings and Sophia's striking photographs. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every day felt like a new beginning. I started to embrace the little things I'd forgotten to appreciate. Morning coffee on the balcony, the sound of rain against the window, the way the world seemed to glow after a storm. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Leaving Isabella wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a better one. And as I stood there, paintbrush in hand, watching another sunset with Sophia by my side, I realized something. Happiness isn't about holding on to what's comfortable. It's about letting go of what weighs you down and finding the courage to step into the unknown. I used to wonder if Isabella would ever feel the weight of what she had done. Part of me thought she wouldn't, that she'd carry on with her life, oblivious to the destruction she'd left in her wake. But life has a way of catching up to people, doesn't it? It didn't happen all at once. At first, she probably enjoyed the quiet, mistaking it for freedom. No nagging husband asking for attention, no need to pretend she cared. She likely spent the first few days scrolling through her phone, texting Marcus, and sipping wine in the silence. But that silence must have started to feel different after a while, heavy, empty, like the hollow shell of our marriage that I left behind. From what I heard, it wasn't long before the cracks in her life began to show. Her art friends were the first to disappear. The same people she had prioritized over me stopped returning her calls after I sent them the screenshots of her conversations with Marcus. They saw her for who she truly was. Even her closest confidant, the one she used to gossip with for hours, distanced herself. Isabella had built her friendships on appearances, and once the facade cracked, so did those relationships. Then there was her family. Her mother, a woman who had always adored me, called to express her disappointment. "You had a good man," she reportedly told Isabella, "and you threw it all away." I imagine those words stung more than she let on, but Isabella never liked to admit when she was wrong. Marcus, of course, was next. I knew he wouldn't stick around. He was the kind of guy who enjoyed the thrill of sneaking around but wasn't interested in cleaning up the mess afterward. When Isabella's life started falling apart, the declined cards, the canceled utilities, the public shame, he ran for the hills. She probably begged him to stay, spinning her usual excuses, but Marcus was smart enough to know better. With no friends, no lover, and no financial safety net, Isabella was left to face the harsh reality of her choices. She moved into a tiny studio apartment, a far cry from the spacious house she once shared with me. Gone were the designer clothes and expensive art supplies she loved so much. She sold most of them to make ends meet. The Isabella who once thrived on the illusion of comfort was now living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by. I can picture her sitting in that apartment, surrounded by overdue bills and empty wine bottles, staring at the walls. Maybe she'd pick up her phone, scrolling through social media to distract herself, only to see a photo of me and Sophia pop up. That's right, Sophia and I had started posting photos together, not out of spite, but because we were happy, genuinely happy. One particular photo must have hit her hard. It was taken at a gallery opening, Sophia and I laughing, my arm around her, a new painting of mine in the background. My smile was real, the kind of smile Isabella hadn't seen in years. I wonder what she thought when she saw that picture. Did she realize how much she had taken me for granted? Did she regret the cold dismissals, the mocking messages, the years of indifference? Or was she too stubborn to admit she was the architect of her own downfall? I don't know, but I do know this. Regret is a lonely companion. From what I've been told, Isabella started pulling away from the world altogether. The once social butterfly now kept to herself, too ashamed to face the people who used to admire her. Her perfect image was shattered, and there was no piecing it back together. Did I feel sorry for her? Maybe a little. I'm not a cruel person. But sympathy only goes so far when someone has spent years treating you like you don't matter. In the end, Isabella's life became a cautionary tale. She valued convenience over connection, appearances over authenticity, and her version of comfort over love. And when those things crumbled, she was left with nothing but the silence she once welcomed. Meanwhile, my life had moved on. I had Sophia, my art, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't angry anymore, not even bitter. If anything, I was grateful for the lessons, for the growth, and for the freedom to build a life where I was valued. As for Isabella, well, regret doesn't fix the past, and it doesn't build a future. It just lingers, reminding you of what you've lost. They say hindsight is 20/20, but I think it's more than that. Hindsight isn't just about seeing the past clearly, it's about understanding it. And as I sat down to work on my collection of essays, I realized that my marriage to Isabella wasn't just a series of mistakes. It was a lesson. Writing was never something I thought I'd do. I'm not an author. I'm just a guy who spent too many years living in the shadow of someone else's world. But as I stared at the blank page, I felt this overwhelming need to put it all down: the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and most importantly, the growth. The first words I wrote were simple: sometimes, losing someone is the best thing that can happen to you. I didn't write out of anger. I wasn't looking to settle scores or air dirty laundry. I wrote because I needed to process everything that had happened, to make sense of how I'd gone from a hopeful husband to a man rebuilding his life from scratch. As the words poured out, I started to see patterns I hadn't noticed before. I saw how Isabella's indifference didn't happen overnight. It was a slow erosion, like waves wearing down a rock. And I saw how I had let it happen, too afraid to rock the boat, too desperate to hold on to the version of her I fell in love with. But more importantly, I saw myself, the version of me I'd forgotten. The man who loved painting, who dreamed big, who believed he deserved to be loved fully and without reservation. That man had been buried under years of compromise and neglect, but he was still there, waiting to be rediscovered. The essays weren't just about Isabella, they were about me reclaiming my narrative. For so long, I had let my life revolve around someone else's needs and wants. Writing gave me the chance to center my own voice, to say, this is who I am, this is what I've been through, and this is where I'm going. As I wrote, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come since leaving. My days were no longer defined by tension and silence. They were filled with laughter, creativity, and genuine connection. Sophia played a big part in that. She wasn't just a partner. She was a reminder that love doesn't have to be one-sided. Sophia would often sit with me as I wrote, sipping tea and offering quiet encouragement. She never pried, never pushed me to share more than I was ready to. But every now and then, she'd look over my shoulder and say, "You've got a powerful story, Ethan. Don't hold back." And I didn't. I wrote about the good times with Isabella, too, the moments when we were happy, when I believed we could conquer anything together. Those memories were important because they reminded me that love is never all bad. It's just that sometimes, it's not enough. By the time I finished the first draft of my collection, I felt lighter. The weight of the past no longer pressed down on me. It was on the page now, where it belonged. One day, I shared a passage with Sophia. It was about the moment I realized I needed to leave, the night Isabella dismissed me with those cold words, "You do you." As Sophia read it, she reached out and took my hand. "You deserved so much more," she said softly. And she was right. That's what the essays became. A testament to my worth, to the idea that we all deserve more than to be an afterthought in someone else's life. It wasn't about revenge or pointing fingers. It was about growth, healing, and the courage to start over. When I finished the book, I printed a single copy for myself. I didn't know if I'd ever publish it, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I had taken back my story. Looking back, I don't regret my marriage to Isabella. It taught me what I needed to know about love, about boundaries, and about myself. Sometimes, the hardest lessons come wrapped in the deepest pain, but those lessons are what shape us, what push us to become better versions of ourselves. I'd like to believe that everyone eventually learns their lesson in life. It doesn't always happen when you want it to, and it certainly doesn't always happen in the way you'd expect. For Isabella, the lesson came slowly, creeping up on her in the quiet moments of her new, diminished life. Her world had always been about appearances, being the Isabella everyone admired, the Isabella who had the perfect house, the flourishing art connections, and the perfect husband who stayed in the background, quietly making it all possible. When I left, she must have thought she could just replace me with another convenience, another placeholder. But that's not how life works. From what I've heard, the silence of her new reality hit her harder than she ever admitted. She didn't have friends to confide in anymore. Most of them had distanced themselves after the fallout of my evidence. Her mother, once her biggest cheerleader, had grown cold and distant, disappointed by the choices Isabella had made. Even Marcus, her so-called escape from me, was long gone, leaving her to face the mess she had created alone. Her apartment was small and plain, a far cry from the home we'd built together. No polished floors, no artfully arranged furniture, just the bare essentials. I heard she tried to decorate it at first, buying cheap throw pillows and wall art, but it only made the space feel emptier. I imagine she spent a lot of nights sitting there, staring at the blank walls, scrolling through her phone for some semblance of connection. But what was left? The Instagram likes and text threads that used to fill her with validation were gone. People had moved on, and Isabella wasn't part of their lives anymore. One day, a mutual acquaintance, well, someone who was still kind enough to talk to her, reached out to tell me about a conversation they'd had. Apparently, Isabella admitted in a rare moment of vulnerability that she'd made a mistake. He was always there, she'd said, her voice reportedly trembling. Ethan was steady, reliable, everything I thought I didn't need. And I didn't realize how much I depended on him until he was gone. Hearing that didn't fill me with satisfaction the way I thought it might. I didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. If anything, it made me sad for her, because by the time she realized what she'd lost, it was far too late. She must have seen the photos I'd started posting of Sophia and me. Maybe she thought she could ignore them at first, brushing them off as me trying to show off. But the thing about happiness is that it's undeniable. The smiles Sophia and I shared, the moments we captured, they weren't staged, they were real. And Isabella, sitting in her tiny apartment, must have known that. I wonder if she ever compared the man I was with her to the man I'd become after I left. Did she see the lightness in my eyes, the ease in my posture? Did she finally understand how much of myself I'd sacrificed to keep our marriage afloat? Regret is a heavy thing to carry, and Isabella was carrying plenty of it. Regret for how she treated me, for how she ignored my pain, for how she prioritized everything else over the one person who truly cared for her. But regret doesn't rebuild what's been broken. It doesn't undo the choices you've made or the bridges you've burned. Her so-called comfort was a lie she told herself to justify her indifference, and when that comfort crumbled, she was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. Do I think Isabella will ever truly change? I don't know. Change takes more than regret. It takes effort, humility, and the willingness to face yourself honestly. And Isabella, for all her faults, never seemed like someone who was ready to do that. But maybe, just maybe, she'll take this as her wake-up call. Maybe she'll learn to value people for who they are, not for what they can provide. Maybe she'll stop chasing appearances and start building something real. Or maybe she won't. That's not my story anymore. All I know is that Isabella's lesson came at a steep cost, and it was a cost she could have avoided if she'd just looked beyond herself, if she'd seen me not as a convenience, but as a person who loved her deeply. But that's the thing about lessons, they don't come until you're ready to learn. And by the time Isabella was ready, I was already gone. Triumph doesn't always come with a fanfare or some big, dramatic moment. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle. It's sitting in your studio, surrounded by your paintings, light streaming through the window, realizing that the weight you carried for years is finally gone. That's what my triumph felt like, not a victory over Isabella, but a victory for myself. Life after Isabella wasn't perfect right away. It took time to adjust, to let go of the bitterness and sadness that came with the end of our marriage. But day by day, I started to rebuild, not the life I had with her, but the one I'd always wanted for myself. My painting became more than just a hobby, it became a purpose. I started submitting my work to galleries and attending community exhibits. Seeing my paintings displayed alongside other talented artists was surreal. It reminded me that I still had something to offer, something that was uniquely mine. Then there was Sophia. Meeting her was unexpected, but it was exactly what I needed. She wasn't just kind and understanding. She brought a lightness to my life that I hadn't felt in years. Sophia didn't see me as a provider or a means to an end. She saw me. We started small. Coffee dates, long walks, shared stories. She never pushed me to open up, but when I did, she listened, really listened. And that was something I hadn't experienced in so long. I almost didn't know how to handle it. One evening, as we stood together at a local art fair, she turned to me and said, "You seem lighter, Ethan. Happier. Like you found yourself again." She was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by someone else's expectations. I wasn't trying to prove my worth or earn someone's affection. I was just me, whole, happy, and at peace. Sophia and I didn't rush into anything. We took our time, building a foundation of trust and respect. It wasn't about filling the void Isabella left. It was about creating something new, something real. And as the days turned into weeks and then months, I realized that I'd found what I thought I'd never have again, love. But my triumph wasn't just about Sophia. It was about reclaiming my life, my passions, and my sense of self. I started writing more, documenting not just the pain of the past, but the joy of the present. Those entries eventually became the backbone of my collection of essays, a project I never imagined I'd undertake, but one that felt deeply necessary. Writing about my journey was cathartic. It allowed me to process everything, from the years of neglect to the moment I decided to leave. But it wasn't just about reliving the pain. It was about celebrating the growth. Every word I wrote felt like a step forward, a declaration that I was no longer defined by what had happened to me. One day, I shared a draft of my essays with Sophia. She read it in silence, her expression soft but thoughtful. When she finished, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "This is powerful, Ethan. People need to hear this." Her words stayed with me. She believed in me, in my story, in my ability to turn pain into something meaningful. And that belief fueled me to keep going, not just with the book, but with everything. Triumph, I realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it, growing because of it, and finding the courage to move forward. It wasn't about proving Isabella wrong or showing her what she'd lost. It was about proving to myself that I was worth more than the life I'd settled for. By the time my essays were finished, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. The story wasn't just about Isabella or the marriage we'd shared. It was about me, my journey, my growth, and my rediscovery of what it meant to truly live. Looking back, I don't regret what happened. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it left scars. But those scars are part of who I am now, a reminder of the strength I didn't know I had. My triumph wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, steady, and deeply personal. It was standing in my sunlit studio, Sophia by my side, looking at a newly completed canvas, and knowing I was exactly where I was meant to be.